I work in a store, and I had a store full of people the other day, and I do pretty well making small talk with people, as I work in the adult novelty department, and you have to make it as normal as possible so people feel okay enough to open up with you and let you know what they need or are wanting. Education is part of my job sometimes, talking to older people is too, and I love to be able to make someone smile or just get more information on a product that they might not know about or even thought about. This guy was a typical trucker, coming in for his select DVDs, not saying much. Dead giveaway for me to tell he was a trucker. They all wear the headsets and say things like, "Man, I just came back from this place. How do they have a girl like you working here?" Always the same stuff, different person. I've grown accustomed to small talk and such with people. He was wandering the DVDs, and when my line was dying down, he came up to my platform to pay, and of course was talking to me about what his plans were. Apparently he was meeting this woman in the Dallas area when he was going to be there the next day, and she had a kid, so he was a little skeptical to online dating. He tells me that he is old-fashioned and wants her to feel comfortable meeting up and such, and he go to her. As he's talking to me, I finally get his DVDs rung up and bagged and thought it would be it. The "you have a good day" and such rant I tell everyone, but no. This dude decided to stand at my counter on the platform and talk to me while I was working on my line of guys in the store wanting to get home. The guy freaked me out just a little at first, because he would seem to follow me if I was trying to do something on the platform, like get something out of the case for a customer, or immediately start talking to me when he saw I wasn't busy. Eventually, the creep alarm in my head goes off, and I text my husband, who was home, and tell him it's an emergency. I'm getting creeped out, and he tells me he's coming, and the guy is still in my store following me whatever I do. I move to do something, and I'm counting the minutes in my head until my husband comes in. He eventually got the hint. I was trying to make him leave by my one-word answers and not moving from my spot on the platform, and he said he was leaving. It turns out he parked next to my car. Mind you, we have just a small regular parking lot, but it goes from the front of the store to the side of the building, so he can park anywhere. We have cameras in the back, so I can see him move his car to the side of the building in view of my cars, because I went outside and saw him leave and act like I was going to smoke, and walked back in when I saw him get into his vehicle. Finally, my husband comes in. It's an hour before I'm supposed to get off work, so I ask him to stay around just in case, and I tell him everything that's just happened, and he's not even fazed by it. I get off work and tell my coworker what happened, and he's more scared than I am. He's a small-build Asian guy who looks like he couldn't scare a fly, and I thought he was going to pee himself. I get the husband to follow me outside and get into my car and lock it immediately. I don't even wait for my coworker to come outside before gunning and leaving. I drove a different way home than before and checked every few minutes to make sure I wasn't followed. Thankfully, neither of us have seen this guy since, but now I always get scared of coming off too nice to anyone, in fear of something happening that I do not intend. This was a story I grew up hearing my mum tell me. I was really young when this happened, and I know for a fact it was before I was 5. I only have some foggy memory of the event, especially because my mum at the time didn't want to freak me out. Some context. We have family all over the country. I remember spending so much of my childhood just on road trips from state to state to visit family, so we know our ins and outs on traveling. When I was a child, I would randomly hug strangers and tell them I loved them. I was so filled with joy and love that it just spilled out into other people. There was basically only one stranger I never immediately latched onto, the second I saw them. This is that story. My mum was taking me to visit some relatives while my dad was staying at home with my brothers. She had to go to house sit, and in general is a better caretaker of me than my father, so it made sense that I went with her. We were driving for hours until we finally hit a rest stop and got out to use the restroom. Now, There was already this guy in the parking lot who, according to my mum, it looked like he was watching everyone who was entering and leaving the rest stop. The second we got out of the car, he did too. My mum held my hand, and we head into the restroom, but immediately picked up on the fact I let go of her hand to hold her other hand, the side of her away from the man. Now looking back, she told me it was clear somewhere in my tiny child brain I picked up on some sign of danger. I avoided the man as much as I could and would quicken my pace to the restroom and car. I never did that with another stranger ever again, and I had never blatantly avoided another adult like that. We do our business and head back to the car, and the man had gone back to his car and watched us leave, only to then follow us to his own car. My mum immediately recognized what was going on and tried to shake him off on the highway. He wouldn't budge and tried to get as close as he could. Apparently while doing this, a semi-truck driver noticed how frantic and off she was driving and could see her looking back at his car. He realized what was going on and drove up to the side and kind of made eye contact with her, and they were on the same page from then on out. Turns out the driver called up on his radio to other truckers and told them what was going on, and a bunch of drivers from different routes nearby came onto the same highway we were traveling on. A few minutes later, they began blocking out the guy's car and essentially trapping him away from my mother, and as she turned onto an exit to get off the highway to another rest stop, as the original trucker driving us followed in. He got out and spoke with my mother and told her he picked up what was going on, asked if we were okay, and drove with us to a Burger King and got us something to eat. We spoke and he followed us back onto the road until eventually we went our separate ways. So to the guy who was probably trying to take my mum and I, let's not meet. And a huge thanks to the truck driver who quite possibly saved our lives. My stepfather is a truck driver. Anyone who's familiar with the 401 highway in Ontario knows how crap it can be in winter. He was heading to Ottawa after a pickup in Toronto, and just before Kingston, another truck had jackknifed about 10 minutes past Kingston. When the truck jackknifed, it slid into the barrier and rolled. The traffic was moving, but pretty heavy. The cars behind the truck didn't have time to stop, and 14 or 15 vans and pickups ran into the initial crash at speed. My stepfather was a few vehicles behind, but saw the initial crash and hit his air brakes for all he was worth. Luckily, he had the length to get it to stop, and his load was heavy, but not enough force in order to keep the truck rolling. About 10 to 15 minutes go by. First responders are on the scene inspecting the crash and working out how to start getting to the victims still trapped. My stepfather has always stressed one specific detail about vehicle safety in the event of a situation such as this. Stay in the car unless there is immediate danger in there with you, or you can see someone in urgent need. Wait for the first responder to come to you unless you're injured and have a clear path away from the road. So he's idling his truck about 10 meters back from the crash itself, and he sees a woman whose car is about midway in the pileup slowly open the door and kind of stagger out her mangled car. She looks disoriented and is clearly moving like she's confused and doesn't know what's happening. He has an "oh crap" moment and opens the door about to run and get her. She's staggering towards the median, not the shoulder, and he's worried about how she's going to wander into the oncoming other side of the highway. As she's stepping out onto the running boards, he hears an air horn pulled repeatedly. He jumps back in and pulls his door closed behind him, as another transport comes straight onto the wreck. The guy hit more than black ice, and the weight of his load and momentum carried the truck forward toward the median. The woman had made it to a point where she was between the truck and the median. My stepfather watched a woman who he'd been about to run out to and pull from the road get cut in half. This happened back in March. My sister and I were heading to an airport for our 6 a.m. flight to Orlando, Florida, to visit Universal Studios. This incident happened between 3 and 3:30 a.m. We were driving along the interstate when we came up behind a semi-truck. The semi-truck is keeping up with traffic, so my sister decides not to pass him, knowing that I really hate being next to big trucks because I'm scared of them. My family has had a few close calls with them, and I've personally known people who've lost loved ones in horrific accidents involving trucks. For a while, being behind the truck was fine. Like I said, it was keeping up with the flow of traffic and being fine. But then about 20 minutes in, the driver starts doing a few bizarre things. The truck will start to brake, or it starts to swerve into the next lane. There is literally nothing in front of the truck, nor is it stormy. It was a cloudy night, but not windy. We weren't following the truck very close, but after that, my sister backs off even more. Soon enough, we're away from the rest of traffic, and it's just us and the truck. It's still randomly hitting the brakes, when it suddenly swerves off the lane and hits the rumble stripes. I'm finally like, "Will you just pass this truck? He's being really weird." My sister agrees with me and starts gaining speed to just go around the truck quickly, and as she signals and switches lanes, the truck speeds up a little. My sister doesn't let that deter her and just hits the gas. When we get up next to the cab of the truck, the driver lays on his horn, starts flashing his high beams, and speeds up even more and starts to swerve over into our lane. My sister floors it and manages to pull her car in front, though we were forced onto the rumble stripes to avoid being sideswiped by this truck. She keeps going fast, and when we're a good distance in front of it, she gets back over and starts to slow down. But then she's like, "Seriously, what is this truck's problem?" I look in the side mirror, and the truck is just hauling ass, trying to catch us up. My sister speeds up again and is pushing past 85 miles an hour, when we're able to start pulling away from the truck, as the speed limit signs are 65 for trucks and 70 for cars. We eventually catch up to the traffic that had left us behind with the truck, and from there, we are able to slow down a little more. But with the truck gaining speed on us, we passed through them, and when the truck caught up with traffic, he slowed way down and we were able to lose him. I've told this story to people before, and they're always like, "Oh, sounds like road rage." But I honestly don't know what my sister and I did to annoy this guy in that case. But I do know that this trucker made my paranoia around semi-trucks even worse. This happened around 2 years ago. I was 16, and my family was on their way to Mexico. The main point of going was for my grandfather to meet my little brother, who was around 7 at the time. For those of you who don't know, the roads in Mexico, once you cross the border at Laredo, you either take the freeway or the toll road. The freeway is a fast pass to getting thrown off the road and off a mountain, quite literally. The road isn't wide, and big trucks hardly fit in their own lane, as if they respect the yellow line in the middle. Toll roads are supposed to be the safer alternative. You pay a certain fee depending on your vehicle at different spots, and there's supposed to be federal policemen along the highway. About 4 hours before we got to my dad's hometown, we approached a bridge with a lot of traffic, which was odd since the rest of the road hadn't been so clustered. Being from the US, we found it odd that some vehicles were driving over the white line on the right side of each lane, in the shoulder. My dad, the driver, assumed it was to give access to passing. Keep in mind we had never driven to Mexico alone, and it had been over 8 years since we were last there. So there was an 18-wheeler, or perhaps 26-wheeler in front of us. It was like those FedEx trucks that pulled 2 short trailers at once, but this one was pulling 3 normal-sized ones. It was moving so slow, being the cause of traffic in the right lane. Since he was driving on the shoulder, my dad decided to pass him, still able to do so without crossing the yellow line into oncoming traffic. We noticed that the other cars weren't doing the same, but we didn't think much of it. After a while, I looked back out the window, trying to take a picture of the sunset. This is when I saw the same truck coming at us at full speed. I froze in fear as I saw this gigantic thing of a truck coming at us. My brothers noticed that I was staring out the window and looking back. My younger brother, at 13, yelled to my dad that he needed to move. As if things could get worse, there was traffic on the oncoming lane, so there was no way of us passing the vehicle in front of us. My mum began to panic. Her then undiagnosed anxiety was getting to her, and she was constantly turning in her seat, yelling to my dad that the truck didn't seem to be slowing down. My dad managed to calm her, and we refused to look back and build into the anxiety. 3 minutes later, my 7-year-old brother looked back and said the truck was tailgating us. It was flashing its brights at us, and the driver's arm was out the window, shooting us the middle finger and motioning for us to pull over. As if a miracle, traffic was clearing out of an exit, and my dad managed to leave the truck behind. But 30 to 40 minutes later, this same truck came flying past us as we were going uphill. He blared his horn and pulled into the correct lane again as a tiny white car came over the steep hill. To this day, I get chills thinking about what could have happened if my dad pulled over. I'm a mail carrier. I know, super interesting, right? Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of weird stuff that happens to us. I've had people follow me while I'm delivering and trying to get into my delivery vehicle to steal stuff. I've had a customer vomit on my car after she opened a parcel her husband sent her that was meant to go to his mistress. I have delivered adult toys that fell out of their flimsy packaging, and I have seen people doing it near my more secluded routes, and they didn't stop for me. This is the kind of stuff that typically happens to us contract carriers. For those who don't know, contract carriers are mail carriers who buy a contract for a mail route that is typically in a rural area, from what I understand. The fancy mail jeeps cannot traverse them, so we use our own vehicles to deliver the mail, and we are paid on a monthly basis depending on the type of route, how long the route takes, and the day-to-day stuff, and what the post office deems as fair. Technically, we're self-employed, but we still have to abide by the rules of the post office, and we have to become certified to even touch the mail. But of course, being in the areas that we are in most of the time, that kind of weird stuff I mentioned happens all the time. Those things happened to me when I was a sub, someone who works for a contract holder but does not own the route in any way. I was paid by the person who owns the route out of their own pocket. Now, however, I am the somewhat disgruntled owner of a 10-year route contract for the first time. I've owned the contract for about 7 months. It's a pretty easy gig. The route itself only takes about 2.5 hours to case, sort the mail for delivery, and another good 3 to 4 hours to deliver on a good day, 5 to 6 on super heavy days. I'm not looking forward to how the holidays fare on this route. Thing is, before I got the contract, I had no idea what I was bidding on. The way someone gets a contract is that they bid for it. The person bidding will give a month's salary amount that they feel would be fairish for the route in question. The post office and bid holders then decide which amount is the most accurate, in their oh-so-wise opinion, for the route, and they give it to whoever has that amount. I was lucky enough to get it, so I get a pretty damn good pay that I technically chose for myself. All I know of the routes was that it went down into the valley. I live in a very small desert city, with some very wide outlying mini communities. These outlying areas are where the majority of our office contract routes deliver to. My route goes 25 miles out of town to a lot of small ranch properties in the closer areas, and some pretty scattered random loner properties in the farthest areas. There are a lot of hills, and the dirt roads where I go to, it's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know where you're going. There's one area in particular that goes through a small forest, nestled between a random outcropping of hills heading out onto the state highway. It's not like an evergreen forest or anything. That's just the closest definition I can give. There's not really trees so much as gigantic bushes that nestle together very closely on either side of the road, that is towards the end of the route, but it takes up a good chunk of my customers' addresses. When I was training, the previous owner of the route, called Jim, gave me a rundown of the people who live on the route. There are a lot of ranch owners, of course, and they are the ones who get the most parcels. This isn't surprising to me, since they're the richest people out there. We, of course, call that section the ranches. There are the elderly retirees that live at a tiny retirement community set up by the city out there. It's pretty spread out, like a teeny tiny town of their own. That's the area with the second most amount of parcels, lots of random buying, and sometimes gifts from relatives. We call that area the retirement homes. These are the customers I speak to the most. There's the outskirters, as Jim called them. There are the people who live so far off the grid that most of the time we don't deliver packages to them. As a general rule, we are not allowed to deliver boxes to our house if it is more than 3 miles away from the mailbox. Most of them live about 5 or 6 miles from the boxes, and their boxes are in a long line, or clusters as we call them, on the side of the road. As a courtesy to these customers, I ask them to give me their phone number so I can call them if they have a parcel and they can meet me at the box. Most of them don't mind, and I'm grateful for them, because a lot of these roads are treacherous. I once tried to be nice and deliver a box to one of them, and got stuck, unable to move my car for almost 4 hours as I lost service. Eventually they found me, and that's when they gave me their number at last. They don't get many boxes though in that part of the route. And then is what Jim called the ghost town. It's not really a town per se, but more of the secluded homes like the previous area. But these guys are closer to the road, and they're the ones who live in the forest I mentioned before. He called it the ghost town for good reason. These people are either never home, as most of them are snowbirds, or the ones who are very creepy. There are a few homes out there that are usually vacant, that have a lot going on. For the stories I'm about to tell you, there are 3 homes involved. 2 of them are in the ghost town. The other one takes place in the outskirts area, and that last one is the worst. There's more, honestly, but these are by far the more interesting as far as history and the stuff that's happened. Number 1. The Bailey Cluster. The Bailey Cluster is a group of homes in the ghost town that belongs to a single family with the name Bailey. Their mailboxes are all nestled together on the same side of the road against some of those large bushes in the forest. Just before the mailboxes, there are 4 total. It's a small dirt road that leads up to their property. The whole road has to be about 4 feet across. That's how it feels when you're driving up, because the bushes on either side will scrape the sides of my car. I've gotten more than a few scratches because of them. I've asked them to trim down the bushes, but they never do, so I just gave up. When you get to the property, you're met with a large 6-foot-tall rusted iron gate with the name Bailey fashioned out of bent horseshoes and pipes welded to the top. As a general rule, if the gate is shut, we are never encouraged to try and open it to drive in. We aren't really supposed to walk in if it's shut either, unless the customer has told us it's okay. For the Baileys, I get out and walk their parcels through the gate and up to the first house, which isn't far from the gate. I have to state now, I have never once met these people in person. I've spoken to them on the phone, and I've been on their property, but I have never once seen, hide, nor hair of them. There are a total of 10 people at the address, and their mail is split up as if their homes are in like a trailer park. For example, one of them gets their mail at 111 Ghost Town Road Mobile 1, Little Desert Town, la 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 la, and the other person number 2, number 3, number 4, and so on. Every time I bring the parcel, I just leave it at the first house. Once you walk through their gate, you have to walk uphill a bit, and you can see the teal-green roof of the first house peeking up over the hill as you walk. And when you get closer, it becomes apparent why the place is so unsettling. Clowns. These people love clowns. There are clown statues, paintings, mobiles, wind chimes. You name it, it has a clown on it. They even have clown dolls scattered around the place. None of them look nice. They're all threadbare and worn out for sitting in the hot desert sun all day. I'm pretty sure animals have made homes in some of them. There are a few that are big enough to house a small family of squirrels. Now I know that this isn't bizarre yet, and I'm getting there, I promise, but you have to admit that this is more than a little odd. The first house is a simple single wide mobile with a bright teal green painted roof. The windows all have clown decals in them, little clown faces that look like they're straight out of a vintage coloring book, hand-colored and everything. At one end of the place is the porch, not too big, and it juts out about 6 or 7 feet. There are small awnings with dozens of clowns, wind chimes, and sun catchers hanging from it, almost making a curtain out of them so they're clustered together. On the porch is a rocking chair. This thing is painted like a clown. The curved rockers are painted red. The legs that attach them to the chair are yellow with red polka dots. Their seat and arms are white, and the back is white, with 3 big red dots painted on it like puffballs on a clown shirt. The top part of the back has a clown face on it. Put it all together, and it's a nightmare. This chair is where I'm asked to leave the parcels, and I do, but I'll never forget the first time I left them there. There were 4 boxes for them, number 1 and the rest for number 3. I called ahead of time to let them know I'd take them there and I'd be there in about 3 hours, since they're towards the end of the route. It takes longer to get to them, and I'm always told by who I assume is their matriarch to leave them on that chair. I'd never been up to their property at this point. I'd been delivering about a month, but only ever had mail and small parcels that fit in the box for them. So when I went up there for the first time, seeing their little clown cluster was a bit nerve-wracking to say the least, as I am terrified of clowns and have been since I was a child. But that's a story for another time. I crept up to that first house and peered around the place. It was so isolated and odd. I felt like every single clown around me was watching me. I placed the boxes on the chairs in a neat little pile and settled on the chairs to stop it from rocking so the boxes wouldn't fall off. Once it was still, I turned and hastily tried to leave. It was the creaking that stopped me. I froze and listened, knowing full well what it was. I turned, and sure as hell that chair was rocking, and not just a little, but enough to knock one of the boxes on the porch. It was like someone had deliberately pulled it all the way back and thrust it forwards to the rocks as violently as possible. I didn't hesitate. I just ran and noped the hell out of there. I'm not staying after that. Another time I had a parcel for them, and I almost wrote it up out of protest, but I called again and was asked to leave it on the chair. This is the time I noticed that it felt like no one was there. I'd been there a dozen times by that point, and I remember standing on the top of the hill by the gate just peering around me like, where is everyone? According to their mail, there are at least a few children that live there, and when I was there that day it was the middle of summer. Why weren't the kids home playing outside? Why didn't I ever see anyone? The second and third house are a bit far away from the first house. It'd be about a 5-minute walk I think to get to them, but you can see them pretty well. Curtains always open, but I never see anyone inside. The fourth house is the furthest away at the top hill. They have built a big picture window facing the gate It too always has the curtains open, but I've never seen anyone there. Weirdest of all, their vehicles are always there. They never move. They are two old trucks, an SUV relatively newish, and an old station wagon. The wagon looks run down, but the others look like they're taken care of and always clean. This other time I had a parcel and noticed no one was ever around. I got curious and phoned the woman. I always do when bringing parcels. I figured I'd just tell her I was making sure someone will be back soon to get the parcel, as there is a lot of theft out there. There usually is on more secluded routes. You'd be surprised how much more common it is out there than in the city. I heard a phone ringing in the house beside me. If I'm on the porch, I can peek into the window just behind the evil rocking chair. It was close, the phone that was ringing, and I wanted to see someone pick it up. I squeezed myself behind the chair and looked in. I'd never looked inside before. More clowns, of course, and some clown-themed throws on the couch, and pillows too. On a side table, clearly visible from the window, I could see the cell phone lit up with "Mail Lady" as the caller ID. No one answered, but when I left, she called me back. She'd gone about 5 minutes when she did. I just told her I wanted to be sure someone was home, and she said, "Someone is always here." According to Jim, he never saw anyone there either. The third and final most interesting thing to ever happen at the Bailey cluster was just last month. I got a very large box for them, one I needed a dolly for. I called before I even left the post office to let them know, and the lady I always spoke to told me she would have her oldest son help me. I thought, finally, I get to meet one of them. This ought to be good, right? I get there, it's my last package, and then I was free to breeze through the final 50 or so boxes I have after them. I have a total of 670 boxes on my route. I go to the back, pull out the dolly, slide the box out onto it, and start dragging it up the gate. I look around. No one met me, of course. The lady told me he'd be waiting for me on the porch of the first house, and when he saw me, he'd come down to help. You can see the gate from the porch pretty well, but I could never really see my car from it, so I honked just in case he couldn't see me either. No one came down. I waited for about 5 minutes before saying, "Screw it, I'm taking it up." I struggled up the hill with it. I didn't know what was in the box, but I'm pretty sure it weighed about 75 pounds. The post office have a 70-pound weight limit that a lot of companies try to stretch to 75 or 80. Usually they'd go to UPS, but sometimes they'd slip through the cracks and come by us. I get to the first house, and of course no one's there. I look around, and as usual I'm all alone with a bunch of clown dolls gaping at me. I wiggle the box up the chairs on the dolly and lean it against the railing next to the rocking chair. It's way too big to sit it on, and I head down to my car. That's when I hear a "thank you" from behind me. It's a man's voice. I quickly run back up the hill, and not only is there no one there, but the box is gone from the porch. This was in the span of 10 seconds. I wasn't even down the hill all the way. It doesn't take that long to walk back down. I look in the window, and everywhere, not seeing a soul. I hate going to the Bailey cluster, and I end up going there a lot. Number 2, the Blood House. This place is the one that gives me the most creeps. While I was training, Jim told me about this place. This is another snowbird place where the people only live there between October and March. They were there when I started, and they came back the beginning of this month. Super nice couple. I really like them, but not a clue why they live here. Jim told me that back in the early 90s when he first started working at the post office, the guy who used to do the routes before him told him the story. According to him, there was a family of 5 that lived there. All of them were absolutely crazy. The mum had schizophrenia and would apparently abuse the kids because of voices. The father was no better. He was a worthless drunk who just sat by while his wife hurt the kids. One night, The eldest child of 18 was fed up with how they were raised and tried to escape with his siblings. The mother, of course, tried to stop them, and the kid finally snapped. He killed his parents and painted the walls with their blood. The incident changed him, and while his siblings escaped, he stayed in the house with his parents' corpses until he ended up cutting his own throat and tried painting the floor in his blood before succumbing to his blood loss and perishing himself. They weren't found for months. The place was cleared out and torn down and rebuilt, and the guy who built the new house was compelled to paint the house red. It's not obnoxious red, but it's too red, if that makes sense. There's no long driveway up to this place. It sits right on the end of the road at the end of the ghost town. The end is literally a dead-end road, and they're right there at the tail end of where the sign tells you to turn around. The current owners, let's just call them Mr. and Mrs. Nice because they're nice and I'm not that creative, have told me countless horror stories about living there. Sometimes I think that they get some sort of sick thrill out of it. When they're not there, I forward everything, but I always have to pass their house to get to the turnaround spot, and their neighbors always have mail, so I have to go by there no matter what. I've seen some really weird stuff there, but every time I pass the blood house, I just get this awful feeling of dread. Whenever I did deliver packages to them, I'd step out of the car and just stand at the edge of the driveway. It feels like standing at the precipice of a cliff. It feels like stepping onto their property. It's like jumping to my doom. It's terribly unsettling. I honestly don't know how they stay there for as long as they do. I mean, they leave for 6 months out the year, so I guess for them it might not be too bad. But if I feel that way just delivering packages once in a while, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Mrs. Nice told me to always watch the third row window from the left, because that's where the son went mad, and where he likes to sit. She calls him Tommy, despite the fact it's not his real name, but she feels like it suits him. She talks about him like he's her own son. I think she pities him. She believes that his soul is trapped because of all the terrible things he did. When she first told me, my reaction was, no thanks. But one day the temptation got the best of me, and I looked. When you're at their mailbox, you can see into all their windows. The house is long, one-story place with 6 windows, 3 on either side of the small front door. Of course, the house is red with the trim and the door all white. The window in question is the one that sits right next to the front door on the left. So I looked in and couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't see a full-bodied apparition or anything like that, but I definitely saw a face, and it looked so anguished, like the happy and sad mask you see for drama and theatre. It looked like the sad mask, just pinned. I blinked, and the face was suddenly gone, and the curtain, which had been open, was closed. On another occasion, I walked up to the house to put a package by the door. The nice couple weren't home that day. Their truck was gone, so I decided to put the package around the back and leave a note in their box to let them know, since I didn't have a number for them at the time. When I walked around the back, I put the package over the small fence into the backyard. Once I did, I turned and felt myself run into someone. But there wasn't anything in front of me. Nothing but air. But I swear I felt someone was in front of me. I didn't want to move forward. It was like an invisible wall had erected before me, and while I couldn't see it, I knew that if I went any further, I'd get hurt. I just felt oppressive and strange. I actually backed up into the house and slid along the wall all the way to the front, and whatever invisible force was there, I felt like it followed me. I actually began to weep, because I felt like there was a person just pressing up against me as I moved, like they were trying to force me back. Once I hit the edge of the house, I ran. I ran to the car and sped away, crying most of the way back, because it was so terrifying. When I told Mrs. Nice about it next time I saw her, She said Tommy likes to do that. He tries to intimidate people, and he does it to Mr. Nice all the time apparently. Around the 3rd week after the Nices left for their summer home, I passed the house and swore I saw someone standing at the mailbox. But it wasn't solid. It was like a blurred outline of a person. And when I got closer, as I passed, the head seemed to turn with me as I drove, watching me. I do not like passing the house. I'm glad they're back for the winter. It makes me feel a bit more at ease to know they're there. But I still don't like the idea of delivering packages to them, as I don't want to be anywhere near Tommy. And of course I have saved the worst house for last. The Hills Have Eyes house. I hate this house. This is the one that isn't in the ghost town. This is in the section before it, the outskirters. These are the homes that are so scattered we usually won't bring parcels to them because they're so far away. But this house gets an exception because it's less than a mile from the cluster of boxes they get their mail at. These people are never home. Jim told me that apparently they're very rude and hostile. He instructed me to just go to their gate, and if they have a parcel, always bring the mail with it, or they will call and complain. Leave the parcel in the basket that hangs in their fence with their mail in a rubber band, and leave. He said to never linger there. He told me that if I did, they got hostile. I do as I'm told, but thankfully they've almost never been home. But something is. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's true. I don't know the history of the place itself, just that these people are apparently the world's biggest pricks. 2 men live there, brothers from what Jim told me. They run a small chicken farm and bring their eggs to the feed store in town to sell all the time. It's not uncommon to see their chickens roaming around the roads leading up to the house. The road itself is barely a road. It's more like a bumpy little walking trail, but it's the only way to get there. And I know I've said already, but God, I hate going there. I call it the Hills Have Eyes house, because it's settled between 2 large hills and far, far away. The hills look like eyes, and the house looks like its mouth. That, and the way the place looks. It looks like something out of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. There's butchering equipment everywhere, bloody knives and cleavers and chains and hooks. They've got cows too, but I think they keep the meat for themselves. The smell is just atrocious. It always smells like death. To be honest, it wouldn't shock me if these guys committed murder out there and only butchered cows when they did to make excuses for the stench of death. Every single time I go there, something happens. I've been out there 6 times to deliver parcels, so I will recount each incident. The first time was around 3 months after I started delivering. I did as I was told, wrapped the mail in a rubber band and headed out to the house. Takes a good 3 or 4 minutes. It's around a bend, and then that's when you see the 2 other hills that the house sits between. The main house has a fence around it with a gate, but the whole property has an outer fence with no gate that I go through. Once you're up against the gate, the whole place looks a lot smaller than it is because it's full of junk. All the butchering stuff, random metal sculptures, a bunch of worn-out furniture, garbage, a few cow skulls here and there, and then the house itself. The house is just a small trailer that's been cemented onto the ground, so it's no longer mobile. A makeshift ramp/porch that sits against the door and leads to the gate. This is where the basket for packages is. All around this gated area are coops and other fenced areas for the animals. It's smelly and weird and creepy around there. I just tossed the box and mail into the basket and turned to leave. I didn't want to stay at all. When I got to my car, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a man standing behind my car. But when I poked my head out to ask him to move, there was no one there. Of course, I didn't want to stay another second. The second incident was closer to the evening. It was another super heavy day and I did not want to go out there. As I was approaching, I saw someone standing at the window of the house. I assumed it was one of them trying to see who was coming. I have car magnets on my car that all say USPS on them, so people know who I am, and I figured he'd seen them and be more at ease knowing a package was coming and not some random weirdo. But as I approached, the figure in the window distorted and eventually vanished entirely. I did not want to get out of the car. I just wanted to stay there and toss the parcel and mail out the window. After working up the courage, I sped from the car to the basket, and as I went to leave, I was getting right to my car when I heard this loud, raucous laughter. It sounded like it was right next to my car, like someone was standing beside me. I prayed I wouldn't have to return in a while. 2 months later, I had to go back with 4 big boxes for them. This time it was a pretty light day. I was breezing through delivering packages very quickly, so I was happy about that. They're about in the middle of the route, so they're like a halfway point for me. I went to the house and was greeted by a large bull in the yard. I'm not usually nervous around animals, but a bull isn't something you want to mess around with. He was standing just a few feet from the fence with the basket, so I just patiently waited to see if he would move. I didn't want to honk, lest the angry beast who lived in there happen to be home and come out and yell at me or something. I didn't want to shoo him because honestly I didn't think it would work. All of a sudden, this bull goes crazy, freaks the hell out, thrashing about as if someone were riding him, and came dangerously close to my car before running off into the area where the fences were. Then a whole chorus of moos erupted from that area, and it was just a cacophony of noise. I grabbed the boxes, got them to the fence as fast as I could, as I didn't know what spooked the bull, and I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. I didn't see anything this time, but I was afraid the bull would be coming back and tearing up my car, or even goring me in the process. The 4th incident is honestly not the worst, but unsettling nonetheless. I had never had a package so small that it fit in the box for them. Honestly, I almost said screw it and shoved it in the mailbox. I should have, but I didn't want them to call and complain. They hadn't on me thus far, and I wanted to keep it that way, so I reluctantly headed to the house with the package in their mail. When I got there, a single dead chicken was hanging from the awning above the porch. Weird, but honestly not surprising. Not as surprising as the giant dressed cow hanging from the pole on the other side of the yard. I didn't notice that until I was putting the package in the basket. It was obscured by a tree when driving up the place, and as I'm walking back to the car, the chicken and the cow both suddenly start to swing. It's not windy, and even if it was, one of these things is a cow. I don't think a light breeze is going to push it. They're swinging back and forth almost in tandem, and I just went nope and left. I wasn't going to stay for the rest of the show. The 5th time was 2 weeks ago. It had been quite a while since I went out there, and I had vainly hoped that I wouldn't have to go back for long. But oh well. The holidays are starting. Everyone is getting stuff. I get out there with 3 boxes, and for the first time I see a living, breathing person in the window. Jim told me one of the brothers was in a wheelchair. This was that brother. He was bald with a weird tribal tattoo across where I believe his hairline used to be. He was sitting in the window staring at me. I waved out of courtesy, and of course he didn't wave back. First time either of us had ever laid eyes on one another, but I didn't know what I expected him to do. Smile back and wave? When I know damn well these guys are dicks. I noticed, as I put the parcel in the basket, that he wasn't looking at me, but something behind me. I looked and saw someone walk behind one of the chicken coops. I looked back at the brother in the window, and he gave me a grumpy sort of, "You saw that, right?" kind of look, and nodded towards the coop. I just slowly nodded and went back to the car. He watched me back out, and as I was turning back onto the road, I saw him leave the window and draw the curtain closed. The last time was yesterday. I was having a typical holiday season Monday. Very heavy day with lots of mail and lots of parcels. and of course, they had to have a whopping 5 parcels. I get out there about 4 p.m, and I'm already exhausted, halfway done, knowing that I'm not going to finish until around 7. It takes a good 45 minutes to get back to the post office, and another 10 to unload and finish my day. I know I won't finish the route until about 6, so I'm trying to hurry, and getting out to this place doesn't help making it in good time. So I get out there, get out, put some of the boxes in the basket, and the others below the gate to leave. Suddenly, I feel a hard tug on my shirt that pulls me backwards, and I fall on my ass in the dirt. I hit my head on the edge of the trailer and swear to myself before getting up. I thought maybe I had my shirt caught on something, but as I get further away I feel another hard tug and fall back again. This time I know I didn't catch on anything, because I was about 2 feet from the fence on my left and there was nothing on my right and nothing directly behind me. I scramble up and try to run as I pull hard, and I feel another tug and I hear that god-awful laugh again. I didn't look back. I left. I still talk to Jim every now and then. When I tell him about these incidents, he goes, "Oh yeah, that place is haunted." More so than some of the others, I think. In Jim's opinion, the whole route is damned. There are, as I said, other places out there where weird stuff happens, but these are the ones I find the freakiest. After yesterday's little incident at the Hills Have Eyes house, I felt like I wanted to share these stories with someone other than my husband. Either way, I'm in a contract now, so if this is the best of the last 7 months, I'm sure I'll have way more stories over the next 10 years to come. This guy was a truck driver down in Australia, driving those huge land trains across the long outback roads. These are seriously lengthy journeys, and back then, every driver who wanted to make the delivery on time went past their max hours. As you might imagine, you get very tired, and it was common to hear drivers talk of hallucinations. So this guy is in the middle of his trip, driving along the dark, empty road, when he sees something big move onto the road. An elephant. Big grey beast, giant ears and a trunk, in the middle of the Australian outback, right where he's heading at speed. Of course, he's feeling pretty awake now, and swerves out to avoid hitting this thing. Manages to miss it, but loses control of the vehicle and comes off the road. Mr. Trucker gets out unscratched, and looks back. Nothing on the road. Crikey, he thinks to himself. Bloody hallucination. He checks his vehicle to make sure it's all okay, losing lots of time before getting back in and getting to his destination slightly late. He unloads his stuff, loads up with another delivery, and goes back the way he came. So here's Mr. Trucker driving down the same road again, still tired, making his way through the outback, when he sees it again. Not this again, he thinks. He's not losing any more time, he says. So he shuffles in his seat to keep his foot on the gas, and he plows straight into a 5-ton elephant, kills the elephant, totals the truck, and does not make it home in time for neighbors. Turns out the elephant had escaped from a circus that was traveling around at the time. Since then, my dad made sure, no matter how ridiculous something seemed, he, as he is a truck driver, always swerved. In my first year of driving a semi, I was pretty naive to what happens in truck stops and rest areas, to say the least. Not knowing the world around me can have some pretty awful places. That being said, I took a load out to New York City heading to Savannah. With the hours I had left, I planned to stop for my break in Jessup. Arrived while the sun was still up, around 6:30 p.m, and didn't think much of my surroundings, so I went inside to eat. After eating, I went back outside to see literally 60 women wandering around everywhere. I had to guess they must have been between the ages of 18 to 75. I was propositioned at least 15 times on my way back to my truck, and it didn't stop there. All through the night, I had a lot of lot lizards knocking on my truck door. Worst place ever to take a break. I never stopped there any longer. These women all looked like they chose meth as a career in life. Jessup MDTA is a place of sadness and despair. I had went into the gas station with a co-worker to fill up on gas. When I was on my way to walk inside, this woman with long, red and matted hair kept on staring me down. I even said, "Evening, ma'am," as I went inside. As I got in, I turned and looked and she was still staring. So I went about my business, grabbed a drink, and was fixing up a hot dog, when I see that she is still staring. I turned to my co-worker and told him she was being a creeper. My co-worker just replied she was just admiring my beauty, as smart-ass as anyone ever could be. He then later noticed that she was acting weird towards me, and as we went to leave I mentioned to the clerk that they had a doozy on their hands, sea lot lizards there all the time, and mentioned, yeah, she had ran off with people and had been there for 3 days prior to this one. Anyway, as I went to turn around and leave, she was pressed up against the door, holding them shut and staring at me. I motioned with my hand for her to move, and she took a step back. I blew through the left exit door and sprinted back to the truck. The next night, I hadn't seen her before work and thought she had left, but that night I had a pack of smokes and some gas. I entered and exited and never saw her until I was about to leave. As I put the fueling pump away, I could feel someone had come up behind me, and sure as hell it was her. I just slowly turned as I opened the door, and she tried to force her way into my truck. Luckily, another co-worker was at the pump next to mine and forced her off me, and a police officer was there to help assist and put her out in his squad car. Ever since, I tend to stay away from that place. I'm a big guy. I couldn't move an inch due to sheer fear, and even conceal and carry couldn't move a single inch. This happened about 5 years ago. I live in a remote town in a fairly secluded part of the country. We don't get many visitors, but we do get trucks driving straight through town, as there is no bypass. It doesn't bother us. It's happened all the time. They always have to pass through the same road, which also situates our main store, Walmart, where we all pass for groceries. Now, this particular Walmart is on the smaller side. Anyway, I had just left my house one day and was going over to see a neighbor of mine. We needed to discuss some urgent business concerning the selling of land. As I was making my way over, I bumped into my friend on her bicycle. She was telling me all about her day, how she was getting divorced from her husband still, and all the stuff that went along with that. Generally sharing the woes of a 50-year-old woman who's lost pretty much everything. As you can imagine, it wasn't a fun conversation, but I digress. We were just talking amongst ourselves, and I was starting to get bored of her conversation. I really needed to go and see my friend, as she was already expecting me. So I politely excused myself and let her know that we should catch up over tea in the coming days. She gave me a little smile at the sign of friendship and invitation, and said that she would be over next week. I gladly agreed, and she went on her way, continuing on her bike to do whatever it is that she was going to do. So I went to my friend's house, had the talk I needed to, and was making my way back home. Please note, I was walking. Now, as I was making my way back, I look up the road and there's a hill. It's not a very big hill, but at the crest of the hill, that is when all vehicles tend to slow down, as the descent is the entrance into town. I look up the hill, and there is the lady I was speaking to earlier, coming down on her bike. I wonder if she can see me, and think for a moment if I should give her a wave, but realize that it wouldn't be long before she made it down, as there was still a little bit of a walk to my house, and we may just say hello then, if at all. I absent-mindedly continue my walk down, and am just passing a pub when I hear something. There is a truck approaching from the hill. It crests, and it makes its way down towards me. And then the sound that I will never forget occurred. I can't even begin to describe it, but it was just a sound of utter destruction. This lady that I had just spoken to, not even an hour ago, was now being trampled by the wheels of this gargantuan behemoth. She went underneath and underneath. Her bicycle was crushed, her body was destroyed, and blood was everywhere. It was like something out of a horror movie. Now, as many of you would expect, the truck slowed down. But you'd be wrong. The truck didn't slow down at all. In my mind, I wasn't sure if the truck driver had seen this lady at all, even though it was the middle of the day, and she was even wearing those reflective jackets. And now, she was being torn apart and smushed along the road. Part of me tries to forget this next part, as the truck just kept on driving, and just as quickly as it had entered our small town, made its way out of it and onto the horizon. I started having a panic attack. I was freaking out hardcore. This lady who I had just spoken to moments ago was now dead, and all in pieces along the road. I recall looking over, her mangled bike a mess on the floor, with the bloody remains of a hand still attached to the handlebars. Bystanders came, dialed 911, and I was in shock. To cut a long story short, the driver was stopped at the next town. There were bits of her body and blood scattered all over the road. They say from his reaction that he genuinely had no idea what he'd done, as when he got out of his truck, when the police asked him to, only then did he look down and see the carnage which he had caused. The blood, the flesh, all over the wheels. He also had a meltdown. He was crying and was lost and inconsolable. I don't blame him. I wish there were a moral to this story. It's not like anyone was doing anything wrong. Perhaps the truck driver, for that split second as he was slowing down, absent-mindedly forgot to look and missed my friend completely. Who knows? I don't know if I'll ever know the truth. What I do know is that he was found not guilty. I'm not sure if he ever drove again, as I only loosely followed the case from the tidbits that were told to me from my other friends. But I still feel sorry for him. I don't know if he would ever drive again after that. I know I wouldn't. And of course for her and her family, and the loss that they suffered. It's not easy. All that I ask is to all you truckers out there, please pay attention on the roads, never overdo your hours, and drive responsibly. I think it's the most we can ask for. This story took place in late 2014. I am a female from Australia, based in southeast Queensland, and truck driving at the time. I was transporting horses all throughout Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria. For some context, at that time of year, a lot of horses had to go to the Hunter Valley in central New South Wales for the breeding season, and there are two main roads that I would take. The first road is the New England Highway, a direct south run to the Hunter Valley, just under 700 kilometers. It has a good road surface, but had a lot of hills, ranges and towns to go up, down and through, making it hard on the horses, straining on the corners, and the constant changes in speed. The other road was a bit to the west, and about 50 kilometers longer than the New England one, but the one I preferred to travel, as it was mostly flat the whole way, and half the number of towns to slow down for, making it easier for the horses in my truck. When the glitch happened, I was coming home, so heading north on the western road. It had been a long day, but I had a couple of hours sleep and a cup of coffee with lunch. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and I was just leaving the town of Nibiri, about halfway point on my trip. On the north side of town, you would go over the railway tracks. There is a big overpass, and I remember going over the tracks and starting to speed up for the 100-kilometer-an-hour sign, when things started to shimmer, and I could hear a soft ringing in my ears suddenly. I was in a completely different place. The sun was now low on the horizon. There were small lots of land with houses, trucks, and large gardens on either side of the road. I had been speeding when I came to, but quickly slowed back down and pulled off to the side of the road. As I was doing it, I realized I was now on the north side of a town called Gundiwindi. I had planned to stop there to fuel up the truck and get another coffee and some dinner, but I was now on the north side, past the truck stop, and couldn't remember any of the trip from Narabi to here. Let me give you some details of the road between the two towns. First, there's over 220 kilometers, or 136 miles, between these big two towns. There are half a dozen smaller towns, more like a group of houses around a pub, but if you blink you'd miss them, that you had to slow down for and navigate through. Traffic lights, bridges, roundabouts, corners, roadworks. Mort is a bigger town in the middle, and at the time before the bypass was put in, you had to go through the main street that had a couple of hard corners with crappy roundabouts you had to take extra care with, all of which I should not have forgotten. I was freaked out, but still needed fuel for the truck. I carefully turned around and made my way to the truck stop, fueled the truck, parked ticked out of the way, got a coffee and a meat pie, and stayed there in the truckies lounge for a while to work out what happened. I had lost close to 3 hours of time, and I don't think I'd fallen asleep or spaced out or anything like that. It was like I had just driven through a wormhole and came back out on the road. I still had to get the horses to their home, so had to get moving again. The rest of the trip went well, and it was very late to the point of being early when I parked at the depot and jumped on my bunk to sleep. In the morning, while clearing the truck ready to go again, my boss came out to tell me what I had for my next trip. After she finished telling me about my pickups, she said that she had a look at my movements on her computer, from the GPS tracker in my truck to check times, and you may have guessed, it hadn't recorded anything between Narrabiri and Gundiwundi. Safe to say, I went down the other road for the next few trips. I was driving in the middle of the night. I was doing a very long shift, and admittedly was over hours. I was running a little late, as my previous stop had taken a bit longer than I had anticipated, and I'd run into some trouble in a gas station, as I'd left my wallet in my chassis, and it took a while to go back, explain it all, and pay, and yada yada. Anyway, point being, I was running late, and I was trying to get to the drop-off point as quickly as possible. I was exhausted and really wanted sleep, but I kept on going, knowing that I was nearly there, and I would be rewarded by sweet slumber soon enough. The roads were empty. This was your typical desert highway, with absolutely nothing around you. The moon was high in the sky, partially illuminating the beautiful landscape as I drove in the dark, alone and with my thoughts. There were times when I found myself almost nodding off, and I had to keep downing that monster to keep myself awake and banging out the mad tunes as you do. I looked at my clock. Barely an hour to go. I knew I could make it, but I told myself I really needed a cigarette break, and honestly, 3 to 5 minutes would be fine. So I slow down on the side of the highway, making sure that I am safe, and get out and light my cigarette. I stand there and walk around my truck just doing a check absent-mindedly while finishing my puff. I look about. It's beautiful. There are no sounds other than the wind gently brushing against me, and I feel completely at peace as I suck on my cancer stick. Just before I'm about to enter my truck again, do I look up at the moon and into the distance, and just take in this peaceful scene for a few more moments. That's when I hear it. I hear someone, at least I think someone, in the distance. It sounds like voices in the distance. Is it a car with the windows down? I tune my ears. It's coming from the desert, not the highway. I look out and see some lights pinpointing in the distance. They seem to be approaching. I start to get freaked out. Lights in the desert aren't a good thing. I slowly make my way back up into my truck and turn on the engine. From this higher viewpoint, I look again. The lights are certainly coming this way. I assumed that they were cars, but upon staring at them for a few more moments, did I notice that they certainly couldn't be. The path was all wrong. They were just going all over the place. It didn't seem possible that a motor vehicle could sway that much, and yet they kept on approaching. I estimated now that they must be about a mile away, and I genuinely didn't fancy seeing what would happen when they arrived. I started my truck, but it wouldn't turn on. It was like it was dead. I tried again and again, but it wouldn't turn on. I was starting to brick it. Did my truck break down in the middle of nowhere? Not only was I going to miss my delivery, but these spooky lights were scaring the hell out of me. I looked over. They were getting closer. A growing sense of panic and urgency swept over me as I kept fumbling with the keys, trying and trying again to get this thing started. Nothing. Fear overcame me. It was getting to the point where I was accepting my fate, that I was going to be taken by some supernatural force. The lights, their arrival was imminent. They were getting brighter and brighter, and just as they approached the road, did they zoom past and continue on through the desert. I twisted my head, and they kept on going. They weren't cars. I don't even know what they were. Like pure light, just bounding through the desert at impossible speeds. They kept on going and going, and I stared at them for about 2 minutes, thankful that they hadn't stuck around. I tried turning the key once more, and my truck started. I could have cried in that moment. I was so scared. I wasted no time in driving way past the speed limit and making my destination on time. I'm not sure what it was, but the fear and adrenaline sure gave me the kick I needed, and I didn't need a single sip of Monster the whole ride back. I've always been a bit of a loner, which is why the thought of being stuck in a truck alone was incredibly appealing to me when picking career paths. I really enjoyed being a trucker, and have been one for the last 40 years. There is one story that always comes to mind, and that is the story of Sally. Now, on my truck routes, I would usually encounter lot lizards, those nasty women just waiting to prey on you. It was at one of these places, when I was having dinner, that I encountered Sally. I'm sure that she was a lady of the night, and when we first met, she was also offering her services. But I told her to sit down and just talk to me for a little while, if she wouldn't mind keeping an old man company. She accepted, and we had dinner, and made polite conversation, and just talked about each other's lives, where we came from, what drove us, why we are where we are today. Honestly, I was just lonely, and enjoyed having the company, and listening about her tragic life. I gave her $50. At the end of the meal, I said I had a nice time, slipped her a 50 for her time, and made my way. It became a recurring thing. Whenever I'd pass by, I'd always go in, have dinner, and if Sally were about, invite her too. Don't worry, I didn't pay her anymore, but we became quite good friends, and she'd tell me all the news and gossip from the area. Who'd come, who'd gone, any interesting news and like. We really grew a close friendship. Now, despite her choice in profession, she told me she had a boyfriend that lived in this town, but she never told me the name, just that he was comfortable with her choice of career, although not all of the time, and said that he could become violent. I tried to distance myself from that. I didn't want to get involved with her boyfriend or anything. I just wanted polite conversation when I was about. One day, though, she stopped showing up. After about 2 months' worth, I finally asked someone else if they'd seen Sally around. It took a while, but one of the other ladies said that she had disappeared and that no one had seen her for quite a while now. So that was that. My talks with Sally faded into non-existence. But every time I drove by and stopped, I wished that Sally would walk through the doors so we could have a catch-up and a nice chat like we used to. We never did, though. I was sitting in that very same diner, having some food and watching the news on the TV, when something came on. They'd found the remains of a woman at the bottom of a ravine. My heart fell to my stomach. I knew who it was. I didn't need confirmation. In the weeks that followed, did they match her DNA? It was Sally, all right. She'd been strangled, stabbed, and thrown down, left to die, which she did. It was her boyfriend. The boyfriend with violent tendencies. The first time I saw his face was the mugshot on the news. How could someone be so cruel? I don't know what happened to him. I guess I didn't follow the case enough. I hope he got what he deserved, though. I am not a trucker, but I dated a girl who was. She was short haul, but occasionally had to run loads to a warehouse out of state. When she did, I usually tagged along. We pulled into this nasty, abandoned-looking truck stop right on the New Mexico-Texas border for fuel. All fueled up, we headed inside to see if we could get something to eat. The inside of this place looked like something out of Fallout. Mostly empty shelves with random dust-covered canned goods and old boxes of this and that, lights flickering and making that pinging sound. Not a soul to be found. We grabbed a few bags of chips and waited near the register. After making some noise, and waiting for maybe 5 minutes, we put the stuff back and went outside. Surrounding her truck were about 10 guys who looked very scary. Remembering I had left my gun in the truck, my stomach dropped. A biker then rolls up and talks to the 2 guys near the back of the truck for a minute, then does the slitting throat motion. My girlfriend is shaking and close to crying. I'm pretty sure I've already crapped my pants. The biker throws his hands up and tells everyone to move, and walks over to us. He then politely tells us that someone had stolen a trailer of his up north, and he was looking for it. This wasn't the one, so he apologized for the drama. He reaches into his pocket, grabs something, sticks it in my hand, and tells me sorry for the trouble. As he's walking away, I look into my hand. It was a bag of weed. We got out of there pretty fast. Good weed, though. We were joking about trying to find him on the way back and get some more. My grandfather was a state trooper and a detective/accident detective. I have 2 interesting truck stories from him. There was a group of college kids driving somewhere for spring break, and being distracted one way or another, they hit a semi. He said when he showed up, 3 of them were out of the car, and one of them was sitting in the back behind the passenger. The roof of the car had been pretty well peeled back, with most of the damage being on the passenger side of the car. The passenger's shoulder was messed up from the crash, and everyone was sobbing. So no one was really being cooperative when my grandfather asked about the 4th individual. My grandfather walked up to the car to see if the 4th guy needed any help, and he said from behind and on the left he looked fine. But when he got around to the front, the whole right of this guy's head was just destroyed. 2. When I was younger, I was helping my grandfather move his old police filing cabinets, and I was digging through his old photos and files, and stumbled across a guy clearly dead laying on the road. It was pretty gruesome. I inquired about the photo, and he said that the trucker had fallen asleep and fallen out of his truck and ran himself over, cutting himself in half. It was the middle of winter, so he froze to the ground. My grandfather said they had to pretty much scrape him off the floor. I am not a trucker, but I heard a crazy story from a buddy of mine when we were really young. There is this one large truck stop in the city that we live in, and we were getting our driving licenses, and they had to do on-the-road training with a driving instructor. The city is small enough that the instructors know a lot of the police in town, and as my buddy drove past the truck stop, they noticed a ton of police cars and emergency service vehicles. They stopped to say hello to the police, and one of them informed the driver and instructor that a driver got drunk and asked if they could show the kids what happened to people who drink around heavy machinery. He told me that a driver got royally messed up on booze and passed out behind a semi, and as the driver backed up in the morning, he squashed the drunk driver's head like a watermelon and had no clue about the entire ordeal until he was far out enough of his spot to see what he had done. Crazy. In 2003, my son and I took a long trip out west to see national parks and tourist attractions. We drove 6,800 miles in 19 days. We were driving north to the Grand Canyon, and an ambulance passes us, lights and sirens going full. A few miles up the road, we see a debris field on the side of the road ending in a minivan with no door, about 100 feet off the road. Their seats are clearly visible inside and intact. On the road is a body of a woman, well dressed, with a cloth over her face. The ambulance is there with a couple of cars that have stopped, and everyone was standing around looking uncomfortable. Clearly the woman rolled her van and was ejected. No seatbelt, obviously. This was at 8:30 a.m. on a clear day and nearly no traffic on the road. I've often wondered what she was doing. Putting makeup on, talking on a cell phone, changing the radio, putting in a CD. Whatever it was, it caused her to crash. A lot of the debris looked like marketing material, pamphlets, racks, stuff like that. Where was she going? To give a presentation? It all ended suddenly on the side of the road. Wear your seatbelts, people. My strict, no-nonsense mum was a bus driver for a tough inner-city high school, and I had the ride with her after a doctor's appointment one day. I have more stories than just this. Two boys of 17 or 18 started fighting in the back of the bus and started pulling knives, and I just shook my head. I knew what was going to happen. She pulled over, marched back, grabbed those kids and tossed them out the bus, without the bat of an eye. The knives were confiscated by my mum and authorities contacted. At least most of the cargo truckers pull can't fight back. She taught me so much about respecting big rigs, buses and vehicles on the road when learning to drive. Give them space. Respect their blind spots. These rigs need room. So if you see one trying to turn, give them some wiggle room. And don't pull up to the line. And just know that some of them are driving a stick shift. I can't thank her enough. Everyone, wear your damn seatbelt. I passed an accident on I-240 in Memphis a few years ago. My dad was in my passenger seat, and we were in the northbound lanes. In the southbound lane, pressed against the driver, was a white Ford F-150 and about 6 police cars behind it. The Ford was smashed to shit. As we got closer to the accident, I noticed a body hanging out of the driver's window, covered in a blanket. The arms stretched out from under the blanket, and blood was smeared along the side of the white truck. It was a miserable scene. My dad was messing with his phone at the time, and he noticed me slow down slightly as we passed this wreck, and he started to look up. I said, "No, Dad, don't look," but it was too late. He saw the body and the blood, and we drove in silence the whole way home. It was a somber experience. Neither of us talked about it again. Wear your seatbelts, people. About 20 years ago, I was heading down to Snowshoe on I-80 in Pennsylvania. Flatbed passed me, and after he got about a quarter of a mile in front of me, the brake lights come on, and he started swerving all over, and ended up in the median, upright but jackknifed into the driver's side. Turns out he hit a bear, which went through the windshield. Bear survived, and it went on attack mode. I and 2 other drivers got to him in time to see this bear flapping out inside the cab attacking this guy. Right behind us was a state trooper. He ran up to the truck, yanked the passenger door open, and shot the bear twice. The bear turned around and started towards him, and he unloaded into it. The guy was torn up, and no, he didn't make it. This story is from my brother. He was at a rest stop once and saw this middle-aged woman in a pink Jeep with 4 to 5 small dogs walking them. He continued about his routine and got into his truck and back onto the freeway. A few minutes down the road, the woman and her dogs goes flying past him, then suddenly makes a sharp left turn, hits the dirt median, and barrel rolls. He stops the truck and runs to check on her. There are dead dogs scattered all over. She is laying in a ditch of water with her head just above. She kept asking him incessantly if her dogs were okay. They were not. She was not okay either, as she couldn't get up. My dad is a truck driver and called me really upset one morning about 7 years ago, saying a girl my age, as I was 16, was knocking on his window at 5:10, barefoot and obviously high. She had little to no teeth and hadn't seemed to have bathed in weeks. She was begging for my dad to let her perform sexual services on him in exchange for $10. It made him so upset that he bought her a hot chocolate and a sandwich, gave her his blanket from his truck and $50, and really hoped she wouldn't use it on drugs. I guess he thought of me when he saw her. I don't know. It really shook him. I'm not a trucker, but I do work for a very large LTL freight company. One particular day a couple of months ago, we were running a light sort through our station at around 15,000 packages when we get an email from the hub about a trailer going to be late. Wonderful. So we started to prep for this late trailer, and then about an hour later we got another email saying that the trailer wouldn't be showing up as there was an accident. We figured the highway was closed down and the trailer wouldn't make it anytime soon. Turns out the truck in front of the truck pulling our trailer had a loose brake drum. It fell off, bounced on the ground, and went right through the window, killing our driver instantly. I was driving northbound in Utah, heading to Brigham to deliver a load. I get past Ogden, and it just starts pouring like a Texas storm. It also happened to be 8 p.m. and is pitch black outside. I happened to roll by the scene of an accident, where a gentleman was hanging out the driver's side window of a 90s Tacoma, with a white sheet barely covering him and covered in blood. His head was only half attached to his body. The tires of the truck were bald as hell, and given the pole that the truck was wrapped around, it was obvious what happened. Wear your seatbelts, people, and be safe. I don't want to see another semi-decapitation. My grandfather was a trucker, and said that back in the 60s, it was pretty much the Wild West out there on the roads. Another truck had been giving him shit, and running him off the road damn near and whatnot. Well, it being how it was back then, he pulled out the old .45 and let off a few rounds into the trailer to get back at him. It worked, but he ended up in jail, bailed out, and skipped out of that town. He has been a trucker for all his life and has a ton of other stories, but that one stood out to me the most. Not me, but my mum's friend's husband was a truck driver and was on the highway one night. He was driving along and sees cars pulled over the side of the road, but doesn't think much of it since that's fairly common to see. Well, the door swings open and a guy jumps out in front of his truck and kills himself. My mum's friend ended up losing his job because of the guy, and it really messed him up. So if you see a car pulled to the side, try and get into the far lane as soon as possible, not only for other people's safety, but for yours as well. A trucker purposefully hit my best friend's uncle while he was on a motorcycle. The trucker ran his pockets, took his ID and his plates, and left him for dead on the road. Even though he was mangled beyond recognition, he was conscious and begged the trucker to leave some ID behind, so his family wouldn't be left to wonder what happened. The trucker laughed and drove away. Somehow he survived, but paralyzed from the neck down. Oddly, my friend's father is also a trucker. The world has been so cruel to that family. I was delivering newspapers in the morning when I come up to a street that's blocked off by the police. They inform me a total of 0.7 miles of road is closed off due to an accident. I later learned that in the middle of the night, a college girl was riding her bike without any lights on, and a truck driver didn't see her. He also didn't notice when he ran her over, and he ended up dragging her body to where he was going. The police had blocked off 0.7 miles of road because it was littered with body parts. A couple of street bikes buzzed by us speeding. A few miles later, on a connecting interstate, we saw hundreds of flashing lights, and we couldn't tell if it was an accident scene or construction or what. Since I was new, my dad asked me to pull over and switch with him. I got out and saw the bottom half of a human leg still in its shoe on the ground next to us. Further up the road, one of the motorcyclists had fallen off and got run over by a pickup truck. Damn gruesome. My buddy's girlfriend's parents own a trucking business, and one of their drivers never showed up to his stop, and they couldn't get a hold of his phone. So they looked at the tracker and the truck, and he was in a truck stop in California. They called the police and they went to check it out. He had been robbed and shot in the process while parked overnight. The worst part was that it was his second to last run before he retired. The owners of the company knew him well and felt terrible because he didn't want the job, but they gave it to him anyway.